Hello and welcome to the King's Indian Defense for Beginners. Today I will be showing you the opening moves of the King's Indian Defense, a fun and interesting chess opening that has been played by many of the top chess players, including former world champions Bobby Fischer and Garry Kasparov. In the King's Indian Defense chess opening, Black will quickly develop and castle on the king side, at the expense of allowing White to create a large pawn center, which he will then have to counterattack or maneuver around later in the game. So, the opening moves of the King's Indian Defense generally begin with White playing d4, which controls the center of the board. And then Black will move knight to f6, followed by White placing another pawn up to c4 and controlling the center of the board furthermore. Black will then move a pawn to g6, which will later allow his bishop to develop and get him closer to castling kingside as fast as possible. White then moves knight to c3, further covering the center of the chessboard. And Black moves bishop to g7, and he's ready to castle. White then moves pawn to e4, gaining further control of the center of the board and threatening a possible e5 move, which would chase away Black's knight. And so to prevent this, Black moves pawn to d6. So then if White decides to move his pawn to e5, it could then be captured by the black pawn, breaking apart White's pawn center. And so next, White further develops knight to f3, and Black goes ahead and castles. Further play could develop with White moving his bishop to e2, and here Black has a choice of two main moves, one being pawn to e5, which counterattacks White's large pawn center and forces White to make a decision. White can ignore this confrontation in the center of the board. He could move to d5, or he could even capture this pawn on e5. Generally, White will continue his development by castling, and Black will continue development as well, moving knight to c6. White then has the possibility of chasing this knight away and locking up the center. And generally, once White attacks the knight moves to e7, play may continue with White moving his knight back to e1, which may look strange at first, but we'll see why he did that here in a minute. Black continues by moving his pawn, his knight as well, which will allow this f pawn to move forward. The same reason White moved his knight. Because the center of the board is locked up in the King's Indian Defense, many times play will revolve around the wings of the board, and that is where some of the action will take place if they do not directly attack each other with these center pawns. And so next, White moves his knight off the back row, placing it closer to the center, and Black follows through with his plan, moving pawn to f5, attacking the central e pawn, creating some counterplay on the wing. And White continues with f3. Black develops his knight to a better position. Further development by white. And black can proceed by moving to f4. And as you see, his pawns are all angled up towards white's king side, and that's generally where play will continue for black as he attempts a king side attack. And white may push his pawns on the queen side for a counterattack on that part of the board. Now if we go back through the moves once again, d4 was played by white, followed by knight to f6, c4, and as we go through these moves again, we come back to the position here where in the first game that we reviewed, black made the e5 move. He also has the possibility here of playing c5 instead. And once again, the center could be blocked up by white. And here, play may resume with black attacking the center by moving this pawn to e6. So this is another possibility, a different way for black to combat white in the King's Indian defense. Some other things to know of interest are the King's Indian defense. It doesn't always have to begin with this d4 move. White may play other moves such as c4, and after a few moves, the game will transpose back into the typical King's Indian setup, as we'll see here. And after a few moves, we're back to the normal King's Indian defense, even though it began a little differently. And this can also occur other ways as well. Knight to f3 by white could transpose back into the King's Indian defense with the following moves. And here again, we're back to the typical King's Indian defense setup. And one other possibility is for the game to progress differently. Here we see the confrontation between the d4 pawn and the e5 pawn. White may choose something different. He may choose to go ahead and capture this pawn. And here, once black recaptures, it appears that white can pick up a pawn for free after the exchange of queens and a knight taking the e5 pawn. But this is just an illusion, as black can retake the e4 pawn. And then white's knight is under attack on e5 by the g7 bishop. So play may continue with white capturing and then black recapturing, and the game is somewhat even again. And so if we go back over the King's Indian defense moves one more time, queen to d4, queen pawn to d4, knight to f6, and it continues on. White takes control of the center as black quickly develops on the king side and castles his king to safety. They both develop, and the center usually locks up and play will commence on the wings. So there you have it. Some typical moves in the King's Indian defense. Hopefully you've enjoyed this and you will like to try this opening out yourself. Thank you. Please subscribe and hit the like button. Have a great day.